Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to ask that you all find a seat, get settled for our final session for our WiDS. How's everyone enjoying WiDS today? Yeah? Woo! Excellent. So my name is Emma Condelier. I am a WiDS ambassador, and I am also the Director of Marketing and Communication for the School of Data Science. I'm so delighted to have you all here. We are closing our afternoon WiDS session with a fascinating panel with four amazing women and leaders and pioneers in the field. So I'd like to invite all of you to give me a warm welcome to our four panelists here. We have Michele Claibourn, who is the Director of Equitable Analysis for the Equity Center here at UVA. We have Noor Yildirim, who is an Assistant Professor here at the School of Data Science. Hope McIntyre, he was an alum of our MS in Data Science program and is a staff AI software engineer at Ironclad. And moderating today's panel is Dean Jennifer West from the School of Engineering. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So in this session, we're really focusing on what it takes to be a leader in data science, which is not just the strong technical skills, but also the leadership, the communication, all of the other pieces, and especially the ability to advocate for yourself, to make sure that your voice is heard, your work is seen, and your impact is felt. So today we're really going to focus the Q&A on some of the experiences people have had in this area and the skills it takes to accomplish this. So I'm so happy to have the panelists joining us. I'd like to start off with a question that I'll ask each of you to answer. So, as we think about the description of this session, can each of you share a pivotal moment in your career when self-advocacy played a crucial role in your success? So, Noor, if you could start off.
So when I think about self-advocacy, I think one sort of challenge that I had, not a maybe pivotal moment, but a sort of consistent challenge I had was when you're doing like really interdisciplinary work and your work doesn't really fit into a disciplinary bucket, and you're trying to sort of submit this work and publish it, and it's just every community has their own sort of standards and that they hold you to. And it might be like really difficult because your work is new, it's at the edge. So there is no really standard to sort of judge that work. So I've had that kind of challenge, like trying to push the limits of like, what is the intersection of sort of human-computer interaction, AI kind of work. I'm not sure how, like what's a good strategy to sort of overcome that. I can only say like persistency and really trying to communicate why that work is valuable. So I think that's sort of like a challenge whenever you're trying to do this kind of new work that is just really hard for people to actually judge.
And Michele, same question.
Yes, so when I was thinking about this, I think interpreting advocacy partly as investing in yourself and believing in yourself. And one of the moments that called to mind to me was, well over 10 years ago, there was a point where I wanted to do more in community engaged data science, and I was in a series of places where I was told very explicitly that wouldn't be valued, and that wasn't necessarily a thing that should be part of the portfolio. And I think part of self-advocacy is like maybe not always taking no, right? And I went out and I found different partners inside the university to frankly give a little cover for this work. And we built a lab that we call Community Policy Analysis Lab, Compass, and we started doing community projects, and that suddenly, once we had some success, was valued, right? But I think it sort of required a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit and sort of believing that if you do it, like you can bring others around.
Great. And Hope.
Yeah, I love this question. Being in industry, I think I've had many points where self-advocacy has been really important. And one example comes to mind pretty early in my career. So after graduating from MSDS, I ended up at a company that was not a great fit. I was working kind of as a contracted data scientist, so I had a handful of loose projects, and I was the only data scientist on staff, so I was a little unsupported. And so I'm interviewing. And so the way interviewing typically works is you start with a phone screen. And the way that a phone screen works is for the first half of the call, you're explaining your experience and you're talking about what you're going to bring to the role. And the second half of the call, they're kind of telling you about their work. What are they doing in that company? And like, what does the team that you're trying to join do? So I gave my spiel. I did all these projects. So what? You should hire me. They give their spiel, and they're talking about how their AI team is really tightly coupled with their search engine. And so they're saying all our algorithms flow into a search service, and that's kind of how we power our roles. And I'm panicking. I love this company, and I'm like, oh my God, I've never worked in a search engine before in my life. I have no idea. And I don't know what came over me. Potentially it was desperation. But I remember at the end of the call being like, I just want to let you know, I've never worked in search, but I did a capstone project at UVA in natural language processing, and I took a class on text mining, and I think both of those would be really relevant to this experience. And the interviewer goes, yeah, I agree. And so I think the lesson I took away is never leave a room without sharing something that you think is relevant, right? Like if you believe that there's a point to be made, make it. And then always be comfortable reframing experience, right? So your capstone, maybe you're not working at a company yet, but it's really relevant work. And so find those ways to frame the experience that aligns with the person that you're talking to.
Great. And Hope, can you talk about some other effective ways that women can advocate for themselves, particularly in corporate settings?
Yeah. It's a big question. So I want to say, like, when you get into industry, there's a lot of different flavors. We heard this morning about kind of the startup culture. I've been fortunate to work at small startups, at large companies, and they're all a little different. And so I think my biggest piece of advice is figure out the roadmap, right? So how you want to be asking questions about how promotions are determined, what the review cycle looks like. Every company does it a little differently, and if you walk in blind to that experience, you're not going to be able to effectively advocate for yourself. So both while you're interviewing, you can ask questions that show the maturity of the company. How organized are they? Do you have a review process? Do you have a review board? Right? How do you do these things? And then while you're there, get all the information you can so that you're prepared to go in and prove your value in a language that matches how they determine leveling and promotions and reviews. And that's the biggest tool that you can have is the knowledge around the process.
Great, thank you. And Noor, in academia, promoting one's research is essential, and you've talked a little bit about some of the challenges that data scientists in particular can have because of being at this interdisciplinary edge very frequently. But what strategies have really worked for you in making your research visible, making the right connections for collaborations, and getting grant funding?
I think collaboration is really, really important. The way I sort of go about doing this and finding collaborators is really... So before I started in academia, I was actually working in the industry as a design consultant. And when you're working as a design consultant, like anybody can just walk into the room and have any sorts of project from any domain. And you just need to sort of learn how to work in that domain, even if you have like no experience. So I think that sort of consultant mindset sort of really helped me like learn how to be interested in someone's domain and be really sort of intrigued and like, how do I understand this? What's the problem here? Because I feel like every sort of problem space has something interesting that you can sort of bring. So whenever I sort of I'm not super picky about problems. I think that's the sort of thing. I feel like there are so many problems that we can just solve and work on. So whenever I meet a potential like faculty collaborator or any potential researcher, I sort of really try to understand what their problem is and like why that is interesting and like getting interested in that and see like what kind of value can I bring into the space. I think that's sort of my mindset. And in terms of like the visibility of research, I think one challenge, and I'm not sure if I'm great at this, but most of the time, again, we sort of try to publish in our own sort of spheres, and like everybody's sort of more comfortable doing that. But I do a lot of work in healthcare, for example, and somebody in healthcare might want to publish in a medical journal, but maybe you want to do something else. So I think just like being comfortable walking into a space where you're just like, maybe you haven't worked in that before, maybe you haven't submitted to that kind of journal before. So working with collaborators and trying to actually just like find communities where that work would be valuable, and trying to disseminate as much as possible.
Perspective, what systemic barriers exist that make self-advocacy more challenging for women, particularly in fields like data science, where women are more underrepresented? And with that, what can institutions do to help support them?
Yeah, that's a big question, and I don't think it's a surprise to anybody, but I think it's worth saying. I mean, research has documented extensively the stereotypes that women labor under, and the way that, again, women frequently have to prove themselves multiple times. They often are, particularly in underrepresented spaces, isolated in ways that can be damaging to a career trajectory. I think there's particular challenges of having one's commitment and competence questioned, again, all anew if you choose to become a parent, right? There's a variety of these things that, like, many people have experienced and is well documented in a robust set of research literature, and I think we just have to acknowledge those still exist. I'm sure many of the women-identified people in this room have the experience of like having those perceptions sort of projected on them, so we know what that's like. And it's a real barrier. I think at the end of the day, institutions like have to have a culture that is not zero-sum, that's not overly individualistic, that reduces the sense of competition, only some can win. And I think that culture is set by leadership, right? I mean, it's not something that individuals should take on as their responsibility. It is something but it is something that we can hold leadership to account, or that when we're looking at places that we might work, to sort of try to gauge what is that culture that leadership is setting. I think it's not that women won't succeed in those cultures, but it will. But I think some of those stereotype barriers are amplified, right, in a very individualistic, atomized kind of culture.
Great. So the next question I'm going to ask each of you to weigh in on. So success in data science often requires that you balance being really collaborative with also taking initiative yourself on things. And so how do you foster a really collaborative yet high-performing team while ensuring that your own voice and vision are not overshadowed? And so, Hope, if we can start at your end.
Yeah, there's a lot to that question. I think you're right in that collaboration is so important. I think one of the biggest differences I felt going from graduate school into a career in data science was how many departments you had to work with to get your work done, right? It's no longer, here's a data set in a CSV, write some code and give a presentation. You're really moving into this world where your work is living. And so you're working with other departments to get the data that you need. You're working with product managers to get it integrated into the application so that your predictions can show up in an app and be interacted with your users. Your code is being touched by multiple engineers to serve these predictions in real time. And so all of those might exist in different teams. And so you really have to bring the collaboration if you want your AI to actually have an impact on the company and the product that you're building. And so what I like to think about as a leader of a team is developing a shared vision, bringing those teams in and talking about how exciting AI is, bringing my passion for how excited I am for these new predictions to get on the application and how we're going to improve the product together is a way that I kind of get people on board and create this vision for us together. And then I graciously own that success, right? Thank you for supporting. Thank you for your help. We did it together, but also I was a key part of the success of this project. And so it's a mix of bringing that collaboration, making your vision a reality, and then celebrating the contribution that you made and being very comfortable with framing it in that way.
Question, Michele.
I love the reference to shared vision. I think that is really key. And in that, I have sort of two things that makes me think about. One is about really understanding our work as a collective success, right? And really leaning into the mutuality of that success, I think really helps collaboration succeed and gives people a voice. I think practically speaking, one of the ways we've tried to do that in our work, so I work at the Center for Community Partnerships at UVA. I lead a data science team that does community-engaged data science now, so something that wasn't valued at all before, we now have like a real infrastructure for, which is super exciting. We actually, we have a lot of people, we're blessed to suddenly have a lot more people wanting to work with us, and so we started developing essentially a collaboration handbook, right? How did we think we worked together, we co-produced together, we shared with some of our partners, and we asked, does this feel reflective? And it's a living document. It's not like a fixed thing, but when new partners come in, we kind of have this sort of a research handbook, but a lab handbook, as you will. It was modeled after an environmental lab in Canada that I was really taken with, right? That we've documented as a living document that we share that helps us understand that everybody has explicitly calls out principles about everybody's voice and how we're going to value a collective set of work and a diverse set of talents. And so I think not everybody is in a place where they can document that, but sometimes you can. And sometimes even, in this case, I get to be in charge of the team, so I get to do it. But even outside of that, I think there's ways of starting to sort of to ask those questions and write those things down and voice them out loud in ways that people, like once they're like, oh yeah, that sounds right, like then you have a little further to go, right? You've gotten some agreement. And I think that sort of just understanding those cultures, and it's just always valuable to sort of have that shared vision. And if you can document it in a way that you can share with new partners as they come in, I think it's proven really powerful for us.
Great. And Noor?
I think in academia it's a little bit different. So I can think of answering this question on a different levels. I think one way to think about this collaboration is just when you're collaborating with other faculty or other research groups, it's really like there's no boss, there's no project manager. We're just like equally busy people trying to just like jump on a meeting and like, okay, where were we last week? And I think in that sense, it's most of the time I feel like it's about designing the relationship, right? Like who is doing what, who's taking charge on what, and how do you sort of move things forward on several different fronts. So that's one side of it, I think. And then the other side of it is more on an individual level. Let's say I'm an investigator, I have a research group. How do we actually make sure everybody's working towards a sort of same goal? I completely agree with like, you have to have a vision. It has to be really collaborative. I think my sense is there's some sort of hand-holding in the beginning, but I feel like you really want to train like individual independent people who can do research on their own. So how do you actually teach someone to do research and have this sort of ownership of that work? So for me, the best way to do this is just like letting people choose problems that they're actually really interested in and sort of taking lead on that. And then you're sort of cultivating that sort of lab culture where people are working on something that is sort of contributing to a larger research agenda, but they're really driving what's their own sort of line of research.
Great. And Noor, as someone early in their career, what advice would you give to others who are looking to secure resources to build and maintain a research lab or other team?
Oh gosh, this is something I ask people's advice on. I think, well, one advice I got, and I certainly believe this, like you have to apply to everything, because if you're not applying, you're just not getting it. I think the other part of this is just working on like several different things, right? I think that's just a skill you develop as a researcher over time, like not just thinking, oh, like this will be a thing. Well, I guess currently we're at the moment with AI where everybody is like, yes, AI is a thing. I don't know what happens if that fails. But this idea of like, maybe you have like really high risk things that might or might not come to fruition. And then you have maybe like lower risk bets and sort of diversifying your research portfolio in a way. I think that's some of the ways I sort of think about it.
Great. So Hope, so mentorship and sponsorship are critical for career advancement. And how can women in data science find and cultivate meaningful mentorship relationships, particularly in industry?
Yeah, I love this question. I believe that it is really important to your success, but it takes work. I think that's the biggest piece of advice I can give. It takes work and it takes time. I think there's kind of this misperception of mentorship when you're looking for it. You think you're going to find this amazing older woman who's going to give you all this advice just on the daily, and you're going to find 5 of them in your first year of the career. What it looks like, or my experience of what it looks like in reality is you kind of collect mentors along your path. And so like reduce the pressure of like coming in day one and having mentors. Think of it as finding trusted people through your career and then hanging on to them. And so where do you find those people? There's many ways you can. I'm unashamed in cold outreach. So if I see somebody doing something interesting at a company that I'm interested in, a LinkedIn message. I have met mentors at conferences. They had a sticker of a company I wanted to work at, and I introduced myself, and we found shared experiences in the type of data science work that we were doing and continued the conversation. I think alumni of universities and organizations you're associated with is another great lever to find a connection with. So it's really about finding a connection and then putting in the work to set up the time to meet them and have interesting conversations with them, and then maintaining it, finding a way to keep in touch. One of my favorite pieces of advice for making a mentorship relationship fruitful is actually sending stuff that they might find interesting. So one of my mentors is the CEO of an AI company in DC, and I would send her articles on occasion, just being like, hey, I was reading and I thought this might be relevant to your company, you might not have seen it. So finding those touch points where that person can stay connected to you. And updates are another great one where you can kind of share, hey, I'm starting a new job, or I'm taking on a new role, or I want to share about my project. So take the initiative to find the connections, conferences, meetups, cold outreach, and then maintain those relationships, find a way to get updates and to stay in touch and have it be a mutually beneficial relationship.
Great, thank you. So next one, we're going to do kind of all the panelists again. So what are some of the most common challenges women face in advocating for themselves in data science careers? And what practical advice would you give to someone currently experiencing those challenges? So Noor, can we start with you?
This is a tough one. I think one of the common ones is, let's say you have something that you're collaborating with, potentially you have several male colleagues on the same project and maybe you're the only woman. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, like, I've heard people talking about papers where like maybe there's a male and there's a female, and then they just refer to the work as the guy's work. Mm-hmm. And just like not mention the woman's name, or just maybe actually perceive it that way, which is like the sadder part. I haven't personally experienced this, but whenever I hear something like this, I just say, hey, like, this person actually worked on this, they're just equally contributed, or if I know the work, obviously. But I've seen that happen several times, and I think there's that sort of bias where, the sort of the attribution might kind of get dropped as people are talking about the work. How do we fight these things? Just calling these things out as we come across, having allies. I've seen many faculty sort of advocating for like younger, like junior colleagues, or having women allies who are in sort of leadership positions. But again, it's a tough one to sort of fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Michele?
Some of those challenges are kind of call back to the question about what are the barriers women face in advocating for themselves. I would say those are some of the key challenges, and I want to sort of jump off Nur's point about I think we respond to that together, right? I maybe want to break down the self-advocacy piece a little bit and sort of say we maybe need team advocacy. Like individually, we don't have the power that we have if we're actually collectively advocating, mutually advocating for one another. And I think it's important to find that team. It's important to build those relationships, not just with mentors, but with peers and allies early, right? So that you advocate for them, they advocate for you. You don't always have to do it by yourself. And sometimes when you do have to do it by yourself, you have a team of people who are bolstering you in doing that. I think I would say alone, alone you got nothing. Alone we're toast, right? I think we have to do it together. So we have to imagine our advocacy is our mutual advocacy and sort of imagine the collective team.
Great. And Hope?
Yeah, I'm going to highlight a different challenge, I think, that is actually more general just to data science universally. It's something I think I've faced in my career, and I wish somebody had given me this insight before I jumped into industry. We spend a lot of time as students or in this environment presenting models and talking about improving accuracy, like 0.1 to 0.5%, and writing a paper about it. And that is very exciting, and I love it. That's why I'm in the field, is I love training a model and having it perform well. In a company where there's a lot of other people who are not specialists in data science and AI, might not understand what that means, or it might not resonate for them why that's so valuable. And so when I'm advocating for my work, I'm advocating to hire more people, I'm advocating for projects to get prioritized, and I'm advocating for things like, let's improve the accuracy 2 to 5%. And I get blank stares from executive leadership teams being like, what do I get at the end of 3 months? What does that mean? And so I think the challenge is really making your work understood in how the impact, what the impact is. And the advice is really connecting your work to business metrics that other people across the organization understand, right? If a fraud detection model is 2% more accurate, that's $5 million a year, right? If you work at Capital One or another bank. If you work somewhere that might be a search engine and your relevancy scores of your top result become more accurate, we're talking about improving our click-through rate. These things have real meaning to other people in the organization. So the challenge is like getting outside of your own perspective and really making your impact and your work have meaning to other people across the company.
Great. So Michele, as we think about some of these challenges, what role do you think institutional policies and initiatives play in fostering a more inclusive and supportive environment? And what progress have you seen and what still needs to change?
Yeah, so this is, I do feel like all these questions are really hard. I'm being interrogated. I think so there's different levels of sort of policy intervention I might imagine here, and so I think there's large scale policy interventions that make a difference, and I work in the policy school, so I think I have to say this, but I think we can't ignore the value of things like big scale parental leave policies, paid leave policies, which UVA now has, but did not have when I was having children, and I can see what a difference it makes. Actually, if we want places that women and a variety of gender identities feel invited, we have to make those spaces that they can actually be without punitive impacts from living their lives, and so I think those are super important policies, and I kind of call that the big scale. And I think we have seen progress, but I think progress is always fragile. I think then there's organizational level policies, right? And that's where, again, culture can come into play. I think there are a variety of things that organizations can do to facilitate more mutual culture, more like collective wins, right? By finding ways to invest in the work of our colleagues, right? So when they succeed, we succeed. And sometimes that's about how you value people's work, how you promote or evaluate their work. I think there's policies about that can shift the levers just a little bit, and just enough, right, to change incentives, to make it easier to lean into work we might want to do anyway in a relational way. And so I think there's big things and there's organizational things, and invariably it's going to have to be how do they incentivize us, and that usually comes down to how do pay raises and promotions and evaluations come down. So I think those policies have to be very intentional so as not to cultivate a kind of really competitive, only 3 of you are going to win this year, right, kind of environment, which I think is persistent in many places, right? Not everybody wants to change. And so at some level, we use the power of our labor to go into places that are willing to do that. And we exclude our labor from places that aren't willing to do that. And I want to remind us that we have power, right, in how we allocate our labor. Other people aren't doing it for us. So.
Great. So my last question is going to be another one for everyone to answer. And so if you could give your younger self one piece of advice about self-advocacy and leadership in data science, what would it be? So Noor?
I guess it is just like trust yourself. Because if you don't trust yourself, other people will not. They're not going to trust you, right? You should trust in yourself, trust in your work, trust in the value that your work brings. And I think that's going to come through whatever you do. And I think that's the best way to sort of start. And yeah, I don't know at what point I realized that, but I think that was an important thing for me to sort of, I should actually trust myself.
Was there anything you had to do to flip the switch and really actually make yourself trust yourself? It seems like often things like imposter syndrome come in and make it hard to actually accomplish that.
Yes. Oh, gosh. I think that can happen early in someone's career. Like whenever you're a PhD student, we don't have a lot of positive feedback loops, right? You're trying something, it doesn't work, your papers don't get in, you're just like, oh, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? Am I working on the right thing? What I sort of benefited from is a lot of positive feedback from the people I worked with and saying like, you're doing great, you're fine, just like, this is normal to sort of struggle, or like things take time. But I think it really changes sort of exponentially. Like when I was first started my PhD, I was like, oh my God, I don't know if anybody knows what I'm doing. Like I'm just invisible. I'm not even sure if this work is sort of worthwhile. But I think it's sort of like you accumulate a little bit of it, and then after a while you're just like, oh, okay. You actually like see the impact, and like you don't even, I guess, self-doubt in a way. But it takes a while in the beginning.
Yeah. Good. So Michele.
I have an answer, and I'm gonna divert a little bit because I'm glad you said the words imposter syndrome because I think it's pervasive, but I'm going to analogize it to, I also do a lot of work with first generation students at UVA, and one of the things that we do is have them do some reading where one of the outcomes, one of the ways of thinking about imposter syndrome in that scenario, and I think it travels, is that sometimes you feel like imposter because the institution's not built for you. Right? It just wasn't built with you in mind, and so that's the source of some of that. And there's something freeing about that realization. I mean, it's not awesome, but at some level, you're like, you know what? You're right. So why am I trying so hard to play that particular game? I think there's ways we can use that to sort of build ourselves up. I would say that the kind of advice I would give younger me, which I feel like maybe says more about me than y'all, is just to be brave, to say the thing that you're wondering if you should say, to ask the question if you're wondering you should ask, to share the half-baked idea that you think might suck. I would just say it, right? I would offer it. I would throw it out there. I would use my voice, and I would keep in mind that like nobody's judging me on the insight that I'm bringing. No one's keeping a tally, and if someone is, those aren't my people, and I don't need to be weighed down by them, right? Like so. Just be a little braver.
Good, I love it. So, Hope.
Yeah, I think we're all touching on the same theme. So, like, listen. My framing is give yourself a chance. When I first got out of school, I really believed I had to be ready. I had to know everything before I could do something. And so I think a couple things in my career have made me realize that your career is like a lattice, not a ladder, and so you can move up and sideways and back, and you can be ready and you can not be ready. It's okay. But I had a friend sit me down one time when I was in a job I didn't like and I was looking for what next, and he told me, Hope, they can't hire you if you don't apply. And it just really stuck with me, is that I was ruling myself out more than other people were ruling me out. And so yeah, if I could just go back and tell my younger self, it would just be like, give yourself a chance, apply to the job, ask for the promotion, ask to lead the project. And I think it's the theme we're all expressing is be brave and trust yourself and give yourself that chance that you deserve.
Great. So those are really profound insights, and I hope that all the students in the room will take those really seriously.
One thing more.
Yes.
Having a role model really helps. I think that's something like seeing other women really impacted me, and like seeing what they've done, and especially people who seem similar to me in terms of maybe their background, their education. It's like, oh, like I didn't know you could do that. Oh, if she did that, I think I can do that too. I feel like that's really helpful, like identifying these kind of role models, and maybe not always just like in an academic research sense. There could be several role models from which like maybe you like the research aspect of one person and maybe you like another aspect of one person. So like having several role models and like taking what you like and daring, yes.
Great. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation this afternoon, and I thank you all for your time, and thank you all for joining us today. So he was holding up a sign saying we were finished, but if we have more time,
I would love to open up some Q&A. Oh, Ben, put that sign. Wonderful. Okay. Yeah. And I'd like to open the conversation for Q&A also to include Dean West.
Hello. My question is, have you ever experienced a period where your self-doubt was much heavier than your inclination to be great and give yourself a chance? And if you have, what strategies and techniques did you implement to overcome?
So any of you want to jump in and answer that one?
I think our hesitation is not that we haven't experienced those moments. I want to make that clear. It's that we don't know how to give the advice clearly on how to get out of it. So I'm just reflecting on those times.
Maybe I can offer some perspective on, not exactly like a self-doubt, but I think for a long while I didn't know what I really wanted to do with my career. Like before I started my PhD, and like by the time I finished college and before I started my PhD, I spent like 6-7 years in the industry, and just like not exactly knowing what I want to do sort of next. And I feel like there was this sort of, I don't know, maybe I was sort of coasting a little and like just trying to figure out like what's next, and you're a little like unsatisfied. And I think that's okay. And I think that can take a while. Sometimes it might take a few years to sort of find out like, why am I sort of not super happy, or like, what do I want to do? Just because maybe there's no like clear path, maybe not many people have sort of followed that sort of path. And I think that's okay. Like I would be a little gentle with myself and just like be hopeful that as long as you sort of keep searching, I think it will be fine.
I think I would also add, I think we all run around trying to project kind of the Instagram versions of ourselves, right? Like everything's always wonderful and every day is blue skies. And I think every single one of us is having self-doubts and concerns and anxieties. And I think when you're willing to open up and share that with other people, and you start to realize the universality of these concerns, they become a little easier to deal with.
I really appreciate both of these thoughts. I agree in total. I would also say that I think for my moments when I feel like things have gone off the rails, and objectively it may not look like things are going very well for me, sometimes part of what I've tried to do is decide why I care, right? Why is it I want to do the thing I'm not sure I can do? And sometimes I realize I don't. It's something else somebody told me I should want to do. And sometimes I'm like, actually, I know why I care. And I care enough that I'm like, just trying is all I can ask of myself, right? And I may fail spectacularly. And I have failed spectacularly in my professional life multiple times. Which is actually also sort of freeing. Again, it helps when you've been in the thing for 30 years. You're like, yeah, I had some real bad times, and it turns out it was fine in some ways, right? I would also kind of, on the idea of being gentle with yourself, I also have grown as I've gotten older to believe in the value of resting on the field sometimes. When you're like, you know what, I can't climb that mountain today. I can engage in some self-care, and I can rest on my laurels for just a little bit, like not forever, but for the time I need. So I just want to amplify that idea.
Good. Another question?
Hello. You guys talked about like role models and mentors. How do you go about like asking like older coworkers, or like how do you think for yourself that you want that mentorship?
I actually advise not asking explicitly. What I ask is, can we have a conversation? Can I connect with you? And then that sparks a relationship. It's almost a little bit like interviewing, right? Like, do you have things that are interesting to me? And do I have things that I can offer that are interesting to you? And I think you'll naturally find people who are interested in staying in touch and helping you grow. Like, if you have a couple of those conversations, and you think of them as mutually beneficial, in that like they're learning from you or you're helping them in some way, in addition to them helping you, advise you in your career and your option.
And this is one of those places where being brave is an important piece of it. Yeah. So I was not someone who would like just walk up and start talking to people, but my best friend in grad school, Amar, we would go to conferences and he would just walk up to the leaders in the field and be like, hi, I'm Amar Sahani, nice to meet you. And he would like end up with these amazing connections. So I started channeling and I would be like, okay, I'm going to be Amar. And so like having someone where you can see a positive behavior that's helping them do the things you're trying to do, and you can start trying to, it starts off almost like imitating them, but then you start to get comfortable with it and start to be able to be like, okay, I can walk up at a cocktail party and introduce myself to somebody. right?
I would only add, for those of you who are students or recently students, your faculty are also like available to you, and that maybe I say that because maybe it feels like a lower barrier. I have students going back 15, 16 years that, like, from almost every year, I just have a whole collection of people that I still talk to regularly, right? Who are friends now, but I think, you know, we just stayed in touch, right? And there were people, like, I knew them because they were in my classes. And if you have those people in your life, like, now's a good time to cultivate that, because they're going to have wisdom or advice, maybe not in the specific, right? I mean, you mentioned having multiple mentors, right? But that might be a easier entry barrier to start.
Maybe one thing I can quickly add is one advice I got previously, which I think is really true, is most of the time people go after people who are like a big name in the field. They want to meet them and stuff like that. And I think most of the time those people are really busy. Maybe you're going to send an email, no response. I think finding peer mentors, like, doesn't have to be a faculty even. Like, say you're a student, maybe you're a junior student, having a more like senior student, just a couple of years ahead of you. I think that kind of relationship can be really helpful because those people have gone through what you're going through, and maybe they might actually have really like useful advice for you. I think I really benefited that kind of mentorship during my PhD, and I tried to sort of give it back when I was as more like senior student to more like junior students. So yeah, I think that can be a good one.
One of you mentioned about how you might have imposter syndrome because the space wasn't intended for you, and like being tall and driving a subcompact, I can see like how that works. But like, how does that play out for you? Like, can you give me an example of how you see that in the world of data science for women?
I said that. So now I feel on the spot. Now I'm on the spot for this. So I think it's. I know you've heard me say this multiple times because I think culture matters, and it's about the culture, right? And sometimes what that means is I don't necessarily have to absorb and adhere and enact and recreate that culture that feels not right for me, right? I can recognize that while leadership sets a lot of culture, we all collectively manifest it by our actions. And so I think sometimes it's about willing to sort of break the norms that you feel are kind of holding our barrier. I know I'm being very abstract. It's hard to sort of come up with an example without being a little too open, maybe. But I do think I think honestly for me partly it really is mental. It sort of gives me a thing to point to that isn't internalized, right? Sometimes there's mechanisms that we're trying to understand. There's like, this isn't me. This is this culture which is designed for other people with other experiences unlike mine. And so part of it's just the release of pressure, and part of it is like sometimes we take that extra step and be like, well, how do I reshape this a little bit? Like, where's my agency to reshape this culture? And sometimes it's just dyadic. I can do that with this one or two people. Sometimes that grows, but I feel like I believe in the agency of individuals to shape their cultures, and so I think I want to invite us to imagine that, like, we can, if it feels wrong, right, it feels like this structure feels, like something that I can't conform to, right, and to be honest, for me, that has come up around work-life balance, right, I think it does for a lot of women. I think there's ways of starting to shift it, but it takes, again, a little bravery. Sometimes it takes a little bit willing to step outside of what everyone's told you is how every standard operating procedure is. And it probably takes some privilege, right? I recognize all the things I'm saying are much harder. I mean, they were harder when I was younger. They've gotten easier as I've gotten older, in part because the the barriers, I think, and the stereotypes are worse for younger women, for women of color, for women who don't pass with sort of economic security, right? There's a lot of things that play into that, but I think we have to believe in our power. I don't have a really practical advice, I'm sorry. I think it's partly just understanding it's not you, and so finding where your power might be in that case, and sometimes your power is exit, right?
And I think potentially making sure that you have some role models that you identify with in some ways, because if everyone you're looking at, who you're thinking of as a leader in your field, is really completely different in every aspect of their identity from you, it can be hard for you to envision yourself and see yourself as emerging into those leadership roles. And so really working hard to make sure that you have a diversity of role models that you're looking to, so that you can help to see yourself in the future.
Great, I think we have time for 2 more questions. Another question, anyone?
Thank you. I was wondering if you guys had any specific advice or techniques that you use for marketing yourself throughout the hiring process, especially earlier on when you are still in school, you might not have all the years of experience, how you do that.
When I got out of school, the internet didn't exist, so maybe the younger people should take that one.
Yeah, I can kick us off. So, it's a multi-tiered approach. I think for me, I did a lot of reflection about my strengths and how I could frame them given any question, right? So, I basically made a list of things I wanted the interviewer to walk away knowing about me. An example of this is I started my career as a project manager. I spent 5 years as a consultant building software systems in a role that was a project manager. When I came to UVA and went back into industry, I was looking for a much more technical role. In companies, those are kind of like 2 sides of a team, right? Product and engineering. And I had experience on the other side. And so I just kind of was like, this is a value, right? Like, I know how that other side works. I can work more collaboratively with them. We can be more productive. This is something I'm bringing to the table. And so I kind of had those bullet points, and then I would just look to how I could introduce them into any interview process that I was in. That was a big one for me.
I haven't done that in a long time either, so I'm going to answer it more from the perception. I've actually done a lot of hiring in the last while, and I want to make a call back to something Nur said earlier about being curious about things. And I feel like one of the things that's made people stand out to me when I've been this doesn't necessarily help you get through the paper version, but when you're talking with people is like when folks can really give me the vibe of their curiosity, like they're interested, maybe they're faking it, but they're doing it really well, right? And I can see that they're interested and they're asking good questions and they've thought about it and they're excited. I actually really do think that matters. That invariably is one of the things that sticks with me after I've had a day of 5 interviews. I'm like, this person, yeah, they asked great questions. They just seemed like they cared, right? And again, it's probably easier if it really is a thing like you're super excited about, but I think conveying that, you'd be surprised that not everybody, maybe you would be, but not everybody does that, right? A lot of people just answer the questions and you're like, okay.
Yeah, once you start interviewing people, you see the other side and you're like, wow, okay, I was bringing a way different energy than 75% of the people that I'm now interviewing. I should have been more confident and excited about me bringing that than I was, because I didn't realize that I was bringing something unique. So maybe there is something to that too.
I'm not sure if this is about marketing yourself, but I think interviewing really is a skill, and it takes a lot of practice to sort of learn. I think when I first started interviewing, I was I didn't even know what to say to the people, and you just do more of them and you get better at it. I think there are two sides to it. One is like, can you get an interview? Just like have an online presence or like have a clear resume, right? Like those kind of simple things. But once you get to the point of the interview, I think one of the things to keep in mind is this is not just about you. Of course, like you're going to talk about yourself, your accomplishments and everything, but also thinking of like how can you connect that to that person's problem, because at the end of the day, they have a problem, they need somebody to help with that. That's why they're trying to hire, and why your experience like potentially connects well with that person, and like probably like doing some research on what that company or like person or organization does, and really trying to understand like their context and like being curious and trying to sort of really connect, even though like maybe you haven't worked in that domain before, like that's fine, but it might connect on different levels. So yeah, thinking of, I guess, from their perspective.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Let's give everyone a round of applause.